Once upon a time, we embarked on what we called the DNF Challenge. This is a month of crazy reads given to us by fellow booktubers with books that they did not finish. How did it go, you may ask? We need to talk. We have completed the DNF challenge. I am so excited to make this video today. Before we get into the specifics of the books that I read and what I thought of them, I wanted to share with you one of the main reasons why I did this DNF challenge in the first place. When I set out to make Booktuber, I wanted to do a Booktube channel that was just a little bit different than everything else. So one of the things that you're going to find along on our journey here is from time to time, I'm going to try to think up ideas that nobody else has done before. And to the best of my knowledge, nobody has ever done a full DNF challenge where they literally reached out to 7 of their favorite booktubers, asked for a book that they didn't like, read that book, made that their entire TBR for the entire month, and then came back to report to the Booktube community what they thought of this assortment of books. I don't think it's ever been done before. That's one of the big reasons why I wanted to do it, so you would know when you come to Booktube, you're gonna find stuff that you're not gonna find anywhere else. I love all those channels. Each and every one of these creators that gave me a book to read for this challenge, I want to thank them in advance so much. I watch all their channels. Just because I'm doing something different, it doesn't mean that anybody else is doing anything wrong. I just want to have something here for you guys from time to time that's just way out there, completely different, to try to make your Booktube experience just a little bit more unique than maybe somebody else who doesn't follow our channel. Let's get right into these books. I'm excited to go through them. Was it the best reading month I've ever had? No, not even close. Was it the worst reading month I ever had? Yeah, probably. But I found some nuggets in here. I'm going to share them with you. I'm going to rate all these books based on kind of a stars value. And I'm going to tell you what I liked about them, what I didn't like about them, and whether or not I think any of you will find value in some of these books. I understand that some of you may have already read these books and you probably like them to some degree, better or worse than I did. Let's find out. Okay, so the first book that we're going to talk about today is actually the book that I liked the best. It's not the best book, but it's the one that I liked the best. And this is A Big Ship at the Edge of the Universe that was submitted by Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads. It's about a 500-page or so space opera-ish kind of thing, but it's a real blend of both sci-fi and fantasy. One of the unique things about this universe is that while it's in a sci-fi setting, every character throughout the galaxy or the universe is born with inherent magical powers. And these powers can range from anything from one of our main characters being a mechanist, meaning that she has mechanical, magical abilities to interact with equipment. There's another character that is magically able to generate shields and protect his starship with these shields. Not that the starship is, creating these shields, but the actual captain himself with his own magic. So it's a cool magic system, one that I've not seen before. So those are the good aspects of this book. The prose is pretty pedestrian, meaning that I blasted through the thing pretty quick. There's a lot of action sequences, and to be honest with you, they're written pretty well. So the author, Alex White, really did some good things in this book. However, there are some problems. For one, the 2 main characters are both really two-dimensional. One of them has magic, which again, in this universe, almost everybody does. The other one is one of the rare 1 in several billion people born into the universe without any magic at all. And she happens to be a great kind of starship pilot, and we follow her story. She's a little bit older, she's a little bit more experienced than our other main character, and I actually liked her the best, but unfortunately there's just not enough depth in either one of these main point of view characters to make it a compelling story for me to really want to find out what happens to them. The rest of the cast is actually really cool. They have individual personalities, they have cool magic, but they are very flat. This is book 1 in I think a 3-book series right now. I think that it's probably possible that the author, Alex White, is going to develop the other characters as well as the main characters better as the series goes on. I don't suspect I'll be continuing with the series. I'm giving this book 3.5 stars purely because it was a relatively fun book to read. It's possible I'm overinflating the rating because of everything else that I read this month, but 3.5 stars for the fun, 3.5 stars for the cool magic system. Unfortunately, the uncompelling characters and the very one-dimensional side cast really brought this book down several notches. But thank you, Andrew, for this DNF offering. The next book that we're going to get to is honestly what I thought was going to be the worst book of the bunch. It is not the worst book of the bunch. In fact, from a purely academic standpoint, I think this is the best book I read during the DNF challenge in terms of literary work, and that is The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Eddings, submitted to me by Dr. Philip Chase. Now, this book is absolutely not for everyone. It's about 450 pages or so. It's told with the capitulum device, and I mentioned that in a prior video, where the author will kind of summarize the upcoming chapter with a few lines at the beginning of the chapter to tell you what's about to happen. I think this is valuable here because the language is a little bit outdated and archaic. This was written in the early 20th century. This predates J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. In fact, this helped inspire that series, and it's more of kind of like an epic series of myths than it is a particular fantasy adventure. There's tons of adventure to be found here, but the characters are very flat. It's almost like if you're reading a myth, you get like this hero is very strong and they're overpowered and they can take on 100 other enemies no problem and not come away with a scratch, but we don't really know what's motivating them. One of the really strange things that I found about this book was that when I was reading the summary, it was about these demons that were fighting witches. So, of course, as fantasy readers, we think literally there are demons fighting witches. Not the case here. The author basically calls each human the name from where they're from. So, for example, the main characters that we're following, our heroes, they're all from a place called Demonland. They're not demons, they're humans, but they're from Demonland, so they're called demons. Our main antagonists are from Witchland. They're not witches, but they're called witches. We also have Impland, and Pixieland, and Goblinland, and so on and so forth. So there's somewhat uninspiring title names of these geographies, but it's almost like a little bit misleading because in your brain, you want to think that the goblins from Goblinland are actual goblins. They're not. They're just other kinds of people. They're other kinds of nations. And I don't know, this book to me felt really academic, but in a sense, I was really glad that I read it because I know it's probably the only one of its kind I'm ever going to read. Unless, of course, Dr. Chase comes up with another one of these if we ever do this again. But I liked the book. It wasn't terrible. I'm giving it a soft 4 stars, meaning that it's not quite a 4-star, but it kind of feels weird to give it anything less than a 4-star for the seminal work that it really is. Would I recommend this book? It really depends. If you are an academic, yeah, I would recommend the book. If you are somebody who wants to delve into kind of the history of where fantasy originated and that kind of thing interests you, then yeah, I would recommend the book. If you like mythologies and you want to read something that you haven't read a million times already with the Norse gods and the Greek gods and so on and so forth, then yeah, you might kind of dig this. But if you're more of what I would consider to be a normal sci-fi fantasy booktube reader, then I'm going to say you can probably take a pass on The Worm Ouroboros. There are elements about this book that I am curious. I know that there's more books in this series, but I think it's going to be some time before I pick up Mr. Eddings again. 4 stars for The Worm Ouroboros, and a big thank you to Dr. Philip Chase, who offered this book for our DNF challenge. The next book that I tackled in the DNF challenge was one that was on my TBR, then went off my TBR, then came back on my TBR, and this is The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. And I have no idea if I pronounced that name right, but I know I did a better job this time than I did on the prior video. Okay, so this is a book that was suggested to me as his DNF by Mike from Mike's Book Reviews. I initially had this on the TBR, as I had mentioned, but after watching him go through the experience and knowing that he very, very rarely DNFs anything, because our book tastes align so much, when he DNF'd it, I took it off my TBR. It was only after I thought about this DNF challenge and that I would do it in the first place that it landed back on my TBR. And of course, there is an adaptation coming out for this book and the series on Netflix. So I figured, you know what? It's going to be kind of hard to get a good DNF out of Mike just because he doesn't do them very often. Let's try the three-body problem. Okay, here's what I thought. I love science fiction. Unfortunately, this book was kind of a snooze fest. There are some really cool elements to it, and I really did appreciate kind of the Chinese worldview that the book seems to be written under. I think unless you spend some time in the East or spend some time in a culture that you're really unfamiliar with, particularly those of us in the West, we tend to see things through the lenses of the eyes that we've grown up with and through the lenses of the eyes that our parents and our grandparents, especially if we are all, normally from Western Europe or from America. And the Far East just has a very different worldview, culturally speaking, for the last few thousand years. And we get a lot of that in the three-body problem. So what did I like? I liked the science aspect to it. I liked the great mystery that seemed to be involved. But what I didn't care for are the very flat characters. And yeah, I understand that in sci-fi sometimes we're talking about ideas versus characters, but I think that there was ample room here for some character development growth. There's some cool surprises, but for the most part, I just kind of wanted to get to what this mystery was all about and be done with the book. It was one of those books that I could read it and understand why people liked it. It just didn't really land for me. I listened to this book on Audible, and of this entire DNF challenge, I read 5 books sight read, and I did 2 books on Audible. And the Audible narrator here is Luke Daniels. Now, I love Luke Daniels. So when I looked at all these books that I was going to read for this challenge, the three-body problem was one that I immediately gravitated to make one of the Audible selections because I already knew the narrator. That may have been a problem. I'll tell you why. The coolest character for me in this entire book is a hard-nosed detective, kind of like the ones you used to see on old TV shows where they follow their own rules and you can't tell them what to do because no matter how they find a way to get it done and they break the rules, it doesn't make a difference. We all know what I'm talking about. So there's a character like that who plays this hard-nosed detective. Unfortunately, Luke Daniels, the narrator, used the exact same or very close to the exact same voice that he used for Oberon, the Irish wolfhound in Kevin Hearn's Iron Druid Chronicles, who is basically a comic relief character who's super funny and breaks a lot of tension in that series. I've listened to every one of the Iron Druid Chronicles on Audible with Luke Daniels doing that voice as Oberon. So to have him come in as this hard-nosed, gritty, seedy, underworld kind of detective broke the immersion tremendously. It took the only interesting character that I had in this book, or that I found for me in this book, into almost kind of comic relief. That said, I'm going to give the three-body problem a 3.5 star rating. I want to thank Mike again for recommending this as the DNF challenge and being part of it. And before we move on to the rest of the books, if you like crazy booktube ideas like a DNF challenge, if you're not opposed to a booktuber coming in costume from time to time, doing weird themes and to just grab your attention, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hit that post notification bell so you never miss a video when I drop them. And the next book that we're going to talk about is a quick novella that was offered up by Kayla from Kay's Hidden Shelf. This book is called Nyarai, Traveler of the Circle. To call it a book would be a lie. To call it a novella would also be a lie, and I will not lie to you guys. This took about an hour to read. It was not even really a novella. I felt like it was an outline for a book that the author got bored with about halfway through the outline and basically quit on it. He introduced, or she, I'm not sure if it's a he or a she, but the author introduced a character that was kind of cool sort of midway through the book, which was really maybe, I don't know, page 40. It's a really quick thing. And then you never hear from this character again. He's on about 1 or 2 pages and you're like, finally, cool and interesting character. And then it's gone. And then the last 2 pages of this book are basically kind of like, and here's what happens, by the way, to all the characters that I just mentioned to you for the rest of their lives until they die. It was the strangest thing I've read this month. I'm not going to rate it. We're going to move on. Thank you, Kay, because had you not given me an easy book, I'm not sure I would have finished on time. But again, thanks for participating in this. And let's move on to book number 5. Okay, the next book that we read this month for the DNF Challenge was offered up by Madison Goodyear, and this is Weave World by Clive Barker. I did this on Audible as well. This is roughly a 700, maybe 750 page book, and there are some elements of this book that are really, really cool. It was certainly the weirdest book I read this month, and I liked chapter 1 quite a bit. As a matter of fact, when I was listening to chapter 1, I kind of got excited because I had just read a bunch of books that I didn't really love, and the premise started to come out in this book. I didn't read any blurbs about what any of these were all about. So in chapter 1, as the story started to unfold, I prematurely got excited. I thought, oh my God, this is great. I'm going to get a book that's actually not terrible. Wrong. So this book just failed on all kinds of levels for me. The main characters were boring. There's 2 of them. They just did nothing for me whatsoever. The villains, on the other hand, weren't too bad. One of the villains in particular, named Shadwell, is one of the best villains I've read in many years. I really liked what he did. I really liked his character arc. And Weave World, essentially, this isn't any spoilers, but it's basically set in kind of like our Earth. It's set in England, but there's a magical land called the Fugue that the magical creatures of the world that came before us have basically run away to, and it's hidden in this carpeting. And that's why it's called the Weave World. So we have our main characters that are trying to find this carpet for reasons, but the problem with this book for me was not so much the story, the problem was the author. This is the most creepiest author I've ever read, Clive Barker, and I don't mean this in a kind of like horror creepy way. I mean in kind of a pervy way. As I've mentioned before, I was in the nightclub business for a long time, and you get to kind of recognize the pervs at the end of the bar that are creeping on people, you know, all through the night. And all I could think about when I was reading this book was this is one of the perviest, creepiest authors I've ever read. There are ghost sex, basically female rapists that are sort of like ghost raping these young men. There is a magic system called the menstruum, which only works when the woman calls forth her menstrual powers. This is weird stuff, you guys, and it didn't need to be this way. If we think about the premise of this cool world called the Fugue, where magical creatures have escaped humanity and they're living in it, and humanity's trying to get to this world and find out what adventures come forth from it. Do we really need a menstrual-based magic system? I don't think we do. One of the things I thought about while reading this book was the book itself is pretty good. The author is not, but the book would have been really good if Neil Gaiman would have written it. I just think Neil Gaiman is the perfect storyteller for this kind of book. If there's an alternate universe out there, if there's another Brian from Booktuber filming this challenge right now in some other multiverse, I sincerely hope Neil Gaiman wrote this book and you are gushing about how awesome it was, because I think that would have been the difference between this being a 5-star book, which it easily could have been, to an actual 2.5-star book, which is what I'm giving Weave World. Thank you, Madison, for offering up this book. You helped make this challenge what it was. Okay, book number 6. This is the book that I liked the least. It's not what I'm calling the worst book. And again, this is all very subjective, but it's the book that I liked the least. And this is Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. This was offered up by Tori Tekken from Tori Talks. It's about 400-ish pages or so. And there are all kinds of problems with this book. It basically covers an overpowered main character that is essentially a sociopath. Within the first few pages, he's killing his friends, murdering them. The one thing that I kind of liked about this book is that where it takes place, it seems to kind of unfold. It starts as sort of like a medieval landscape in a medieval world, but as we come to find out, this might be in the distant future because they're finding relics and artifacts and things that remind us of where we are right now, technologically speaking. But that said, this had the most dislikable protagonist in any book I've ever read. It takes to about the 65 or 70% mark before we start to understand this character's motivations. That's too long. I think in today's world, writing a book where literally the reader is intended to despise the main character, and not in kind of like a morally gray Logan Nine Fingers turning into the Bloody Nine kind of way. I'm talking straight up sociopath. I don't know anybody that would want to read this and not want to root for a main character. It's just very strange. The book does get better towards about the last 10%. I understand it's only book one in the trilogy. There's no way I'm continuing on with this series. It's certainly the book that I liked least. And I want to thank Tori Tekken from Tori Talks for offering up this DNF book, but I'm only going to give it 2.5 stars. I think that's being kind of generous, but we're going to be generous today during our challenge. 2.5 stars for The Prince of Thorns. And that brings us to the final book of the DNF challenge, and that is the book that I felt was the worst book. This book won the Hugo Award in 2016. How could this possibly be the worst book? Well, it was for me, and apparently it was for Josh over at Red Fury Books, because this is what he offered up. Congratulations, Josh. You've won the worst book of the DNF challenge. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm sure we're going to talk about it. This book is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This book is just under 500 pages. I will say the author is a skillful writer. It does not take very much to get into the book, maybe a page or two, to recognize that the author has really quality prose. There's no doubt in that. The world building is actually kind of cool too. But the plot device itself and kind of what's going on, I don't want to wreck the Broken Earth series for anybody, but there's some mystery involved. And I sussed it out literally like by chapter 3, which made the book kind of like am I going to be right in my head the whole time that I'm reading this? Because I kind of felt like I knew what was going on. And as it turned out, I absolutely did. And that's kind of a bummer. But I found the characters to be not only uninteresting, but I found them to be unlikable. And I could understand why somebody would put this book down and go, you know, I see what the author's sort of doing here, and maybe they gave it the Hugo Award because it was so unique. And it is true, I will give it the fact that I have not read anything like it. The kind of magic that's involved here is very novel and fresh. I liked that aspect. But I read books for the stories, and to me, this story just didn't even come close to landing. I legitimately didn't care what happened to any character in this book. If any of these characters got hit by a bus on any page, and no, there are no buses in this book, but if there were, I wouldn't care if they got hit by one. I found them all super uncompelling. I didn't care about the magic system. Nothing in this book made me want to continue on and find out what all the fuss about the Broken Earth trilogy is. For me, this was the clear worst book of the DNF challenge. But we're all unique. Maybe you love this series. Maybe you think that this is the best book that I read. Leave it in the comments if that's the case. So I mentioned that there was really 3 main reasons why I did this DNF challenge. The first one we talked about right in the opening, because I want Booktuber to be a very different kind of Booktube channel. So I think we can check that box off. The second reason that I wanted to do this challenge was because I was curious, just from a psychological standpoint, if I could read these books and figure out where in the book that particular booktuber who offered me their suggestion DNF'd it. And if you're one of those people, you know I've already asked you, where did you stop in this story? And I wanted to find out if I aligned with them. And for the most part, I kind of did. Not in the fact that I DNF'd, because obviously I didn't, but there were clear places that I said to myself, you know what? I bet you this is exactly where Tori quit this book. You know what? I bet you Mike is having a snooze fest right now. There's no way he's getting through this book. I don't know why Philip DNF'd the Worm Ouroboros. I have a feeling that just due to the kinds of rigorous reading he was doing at the time, because he read this book a long time ago, it may have just been kind of one more big book in his book of Old English collections and everything else that was just kind of okay that he moved past. But I could kind of suss out where I think people were DNFing, so I think mission accomplished there too. It was more of just a curious factor for me. And the third reason that I did the DNF challenge, we're going to talk about right now in One for the Road. Why in the world would I take my hobby, something I'm so incredibly passionate about, that I look forward to doing every day, that I've created a YouTube channel around, why in the world would I take something I love and turn it into something potentially miserable? Well, the reason is one for the road. Because sometimes the things that we look forward to the most don't turn out the ways that we expect them to. Our anticipations and our expectations are brought low. And I wanted to find out, would I be able to get through a month of books that come from people that I trust very deeply? Could I read them? Could I get excited to read them? Would I complete the challenge? Would I just say, you know, this was just a bad idea? I read books for fun. And the answer was no. I did this for a reason. I wanted to find out, look, there's only 31 days in January. Can I read books? Can I take my favorite hobby, or certainly one of my favorite hobbies, and challenge myself in the most bad circumstances when in this particular month, you'll see that I don't talk a whole lot about my personal life on this channel. I just don't. But it was a really difficult month for me for outside reasons, and yet I still persevered through this because I want to try to set as best of an example as I can here on the channel. We're going to run into things in our life, even the things that we look forward to the most, that don't meet our expectations. And can we push through them to know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, to know that there's a February around the corner, to know that there are books. And let me tell you, there's so many great books I'm looking forward to reading in February. That video's coming out later this week with the TBR. It's going to be incredible. But as this One for the Road is really intended, sometimes the things we look forward to the most turn out to be not even close to our expectations. And then what do? We move through it. We piece by piece by piece get through it until one day we look back, and in this particular case, it was only 30 days. We look back and we say, you know what? We got through this. Now on to bigger and better and more fun things. That's my challenge for you. Certainly not to do a DNF challenge, but to ask yourself, what will happen if some of the things that I love doing the most turn into kind of a chore? What's my plan for getting through that so I know once I do, it'll be something I love again? I want to once again thank all the booktubers who submitted me their books for this amazing challenge. We're going to be doing some really other cool challenges. Will I do another DNF challenge? Probably, maybe, we'll see. I don't know. My guess is probably yeah. But for now, here's your fortune.